This is a video response to Neil deGrasse Tyson on intelligent design, which is a 10-minute YouTube video, which I assume is a clip from, sorry, I pronounced his name wrong, Neil deGrasse, this is probably a 10-minute clip from one of his talks, but it didn't say in the description box which talk it is from. So this response is just to the 10-minute video. And the gist of the argument was that intelligent design is, I don't understand, therefore God did it. However, this is a straw man argument, and what a straw man argument is you set up an argument for your opponent's side that's easy to knock down. So you put up an argument that's a misrepresentation of what the other side is arguing, just because it's easy to knock down, and you could say, woohoo, I disproved their argument. However, that was never their argument to begin with. Like I said, intelligent design doesn't say, I don't understand, therefore God did it. That is not what the argument is at all. Intelligent design is a movement of scientists who argue that certain aspects of the natural world and the universe as a whole are best explained as being the result of design. And some of these scientists are religious, some are not. Some are Christian, some are not. You have the whole spectrum from born-again Christians to humanists, which is a form of atheism within the intelligent design movement. Now, to give you a everyday illustration of what intelligent design is, let's imagine that we're walking along a beach and we see off in the distance something that looks like a canoe, but maybe it is, maybe it's not, maybe it's a log that fell down and was hollowed out through rot, or maybe it's a funny shaped rock or something like that. And as we get closer and closer and we are able to see more and more detail, we discover that this is in fact a motorboat. Now, what will we do? Once we get there, we might steal it, and we might go for a ride. Let's hope that that's not the choice that we'd make, but we could sit there, we could look at it, we could say, hey, this is a motorboat. We might keep walking, we might try to see whose it is, we might do a lot of things, but one of the things we would never do is we would never come up with the idea that maybe this is something that happened through gradual processes. And a lot of you will say this is a straw man argument because evolution is the result of small mutations and natural selection, very, very gradual over a long period of time. And granted, however, let me keep going because I have other videos that talk about this. I just don't want to be accused of a straw man argument myself. Now, I go to a university that is predominantly focused on engineering and computer science. And if I were to put together a model of something called a bacterial flagellum, which you can see a link in the description box to a video by the intelligent design movement called Unlocking the Mystery of Life. I'll put a link to that in the description box. They go in very much into detail about the bacterial flagellum. They interview scientists that really study this aspect of bacteria in depth. Now, what the bacterial flagellum is it's a motor that was discovered inside of bacteria. E. coli have it, many other bacteria have it, but basically what it is, it's a motor that rotates 100,000 RPMs, can stop within a quarter of a turn, and rotate 100,000 RPMs in the other direction. And obviously, different versions vary slightly, or they vary different amounts, but I've seen upwards of 100,000 RPMs. Now, since I go to a university, like I said, that's predominantly engineering and computer science, if I were to show this model to someone and say, oh, this is a very tiny motor that's inside a bacteria, they say, oh, okay, so this is nanotechnology you built to put inside a bacteria. And I would say, no, this is something, they would want to know who designed it. They'd say, this is brilliant, or they might not believe me that it actually exists, and I would have to show them in a textbook to prove that it wasn't a joke, or they might think it's a metaphor. They will think all kinds of different things because they're engineers and they understand design when they see it. Now, we infer intelligent design all the time. Now, eventually with the engineering student, I will have to explain to them very carefully that this is something we find in nature. This is not something that was built by humans. And as a result of the bacterial flagellum, many people, and including members of the scientific community and people who have spent their lives studying the bacterial flagellum, have come to the conclusion that this must have been the result of an intelligent designer. Now, this isn't, I don't understand, therefore God did it. This is, I understand the engineering of this particular piece of the cell, and this does not bear the hallmarks of mutation, natural selection. This is something that had to have been put together by an intelligence that knew what they were doing. Now you can say that you disagree with that, and you could say, no, I think that natural processes could have perhaps put this together. However, the argument is not, I don't understand, therefore God did it. That is simply not the argument at all. Now, we infer, a lot of people say, well, it's unscientific to say that something was designed. You can't infer God in science. It's the job of science to explain everything naturally, and you're not. And what I was kind of led to believe when I was younger is science isn't allowed to invoke intelligence. Science isn't allowed to invoke creation. Science isn't allowed to invoke God, or they'll say, well, this has been disproven. And in the case of the bacterial flagellum, nobody has ever demonstrated that the bacterial flagellum could have arose by gradual mutation, natural selection. There have been some interesting experiments out there. However, none of them have shown that the bacterial flagellum could have arisen by natural processes. Therefore, the inference that this was perhaps designed by an intelligence, that's something that's at least legitimate to consider. And even though a lot of people say, well, we're not allowed to consider intelligence in science, we do it all the time. We infer intelligent design all the time in science. For example, let's say we're out in the ocean and we discover pyramids under the water. Now, I know that sometimes pyramids are discovered under the water, and this is very interesting. Now, nobody says, we might initially say, well, are these pyramids a natural formation or are they an intelligence? And this is early when we might not understand the pyramids. Maybe we can't get very close to them. Maybe they're too deep in the water. However, if we send scuba divers down there, send down submarines, things like this, and we examine the pyramids, then we can start to understand, were these the products of known geological processes? Can these be explained in this way? Or are these the result of an intelligence? Or maybe they're very unique geological features and we can't really tell one way or the other. Sometimes you can't exactly tell. I'm sure everybody has walked in the woods at some point and found a sharp rock and wondered if it could have been an eroded arrowhead. However, let's say we go inside of the pyramid and we see all of this high-tech machinery inside of the pyramid. We might see computers, lasers, things like this. Now, this sounds like something out of Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, which I'm not going to get too far into that video, into that series right now, in my opinion on it, because that's a subject for a different video. But for all intents and purposes, let's say we find all kinds of machines inside of the pyramid, computers, motors. We find maybe little robots running around. Something out of Disney's movie Atlantis. We would clearly say that these pyramids were designed by somebody with a very high understanding of technology and how it works. And we wouldn't say, and anybody with us wouldn't say, oh, well, you're saying, well, I don't understand how it formed naturally, therefore it must have been formed by intelligence. But of course, that's not the argument at all. And would this stop us from progressing? Of course not. This wouldn't stop our progression of science. We would want to understand, how was this designed? How did the designers of this pyramid build these pyramids? And we might also start to ask, logically, who designed these pyramids? Were these aliens from outer space? Were these ancient, very, very high-tech people? Were these beings from another dimension? Or, a whole bunch of other things. Maybe God helped people design things, or maybe this is the work of, and maybe this is it could be a whole bunch of different things. But we would never say that, no, you can't infer that this is intelligently designed, because that stops the progression of science. It wouldn't stop our progression of understanding the pyramid. It would make us want to learn more about the pyramid, and we might logically want to go the next step and ask who built these pyramids. Now, with the intelligent design movement, strictly speaking, they will usually say, okay, this is designed. However, they'll say, you can scientifically say that a computer is designed. However, saying who designed the computer might be a different question altogether. And that's true, that might be a matter of history more than science. Or it might be as one person in an interview put it, he says, to say that a computer is intelligently designed is not a religious argument. However, saying who built the computer might be, and that's true. Now, unlike I said in my other videos, I'm actually part of the young Earth creation movement, not the intelligent design movement, but I wanted to put together this video anyway. Now, let's look at the other side of things. So I've already established that saying I don't understand, therefore God did it is not the argument of the intelligent design movement. It's also not the argument of the young Earth creation movement or any other movement that I know of for that matter. And I've also established that saying that something's designed does not hinder science from progressing forward. Now, however, evolution, on the other hand, has very often said things like the appendix organ and junk DNA are just useless leftovers of our evolutionary past. And in fact, when I was in school, they used to tell us, well, vestigial organs, these are organs that don't do anything. Therefore, why would God design an organ that doesn't do anything and put it in your body? It doesn't make any sense. That's kind of the underlying assumption. And, of course, junk DNA, why would it be that only 3% of your DNA has a function and the rest is just junk that doesn't do anything? That doesn't make any sense. Why would an intelligent designer do this? And interestingly, a lot of people say that intelligent design can't be disproven, that one of the arguments against intelligent design specifically is intelligent design is unfalsifiable. However, the people who often say intelligent design is unfalsifiable, and in science a theory has to be potentially falsifiable for it to qualify as a scientific theory, those who say intelligent design is unfalsifiable are the same people who spend most of their time trying to falsify it. And, of course, one of the arguments has been that since only 3% of our DNA is functional and the rest is junk, that our DNA could not have been designed. It must have been the result of a natural process that came together. Now, over the past 15 years or so, we have found that a lot of that DNA that we previously thought it was junk, useless leftovers of evolution that had no function, we found its function. We found the function for quite a bit of it. We don't know the function for all of it yet, but the estimates for the DNA, the function of the DNA that we know so far, we know. I'm sorry, I'm not saying this very well. And my field is biotechnology, so I try to use less intense vocabulary, so please forgive me. Within the human genome, that's all the DNA that you will find that makes up a human being. Within the human genome, we know the function of about 30% of the DNA now. So that 3% has gone to 30% in about 15 years. However, when I was in high school, quote-unquote junk DNA was used as one of the strong evidences of evolution. Now, why do I bring this up? The belief that many of our organs had no function, and the belief that much of our DNA had no function, that actually hindered science from developing forward. That didn't make science develop forward. That's just evolution dismissing organs that we don't know their function, saying, well, because we don't know their function, they must not have any function, and they must therefore be the result of a long evolutionary process. Now today, within the human body, we know the function of all of our different organs. During the Scopes trial, I believe it was 180 vestigial organs. They argued that during the Scopes trial that there are no less than 180 vestigial organs in the human body. And unfortunately, this paradigm, this idea that a lot of these organs were functionless, made it where researchers didn't research them as much, and it hindered our ability to understand them. So rather than saying that something is designed, holding science back, thinking that things are the product of a long, gradual evolutionary process is what really has held science back historically. Now, I want to go on to another topic. Isaac Newton was mentioned a lot in the video. Now, I'm going to give you a story that's a little bit through the grapevine here, so I'm not perfect on the history details. My major is biotechnology. I have a biotech degree and Associates of Applied Science in biotechnology already, and now I'm going to make this a Bachelor's of Science. And in Isaac Newton's time, it was him and he had an associate, a friend of his, who was another scientist. And this man, and like I said, I'm majoring in science, not history, so my details might be a bit off here, so forgive me. Anyway, this other scientist comes and Isaac Newton were talking, and Isaac Newton is arguing that God exists. This other scientist is saying, no, God does not exist. And one day Isaac Newton goes and has a model of the solar system built. So he has the Earth, the Sun, all the different planets, and he builds this model of a solar system that was very, very detailed and very intricately put together. And he actually has somebody else do it for him. He has help in the process. And one day the other scientist comes over, his friend who's an atheist, and he says to Isaac Newton, he says, sir, who made this? This is amazing. Whoever put this model of the solar system together is an absolute genius, and I want to meet this man. And without even looking up from his paper, Isaac Newton's just like, nobody made it. The thing just formed there one day. The atheist scientist looks at him and he's getting mad. He says, tell me who made this. And it's like, I told you, nobody made this. This formed together by itself on the table one day. And, of course, the guy's getting really mad at this point. And Mr. Newton eventually stands up and he says, sir, you demand that this simple little toy must have had a designer, but you look at the intricacies of our solar system and the detail, the fine-tuning that must have been put there, and you think there was no hand of God behind this. And the man, at the end of the course of the conversation, the scientist who was an atheist ended up embracing Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Now, I'll post a link to a more historically detailed version of the story. This is one that I've heard through the grapevine. I'll post a link to the story. That way people can get the detailed version of the story, and whatever mistakes I've made will stand out. Now, like I said, I'm not a historian. What I'm studying is science, and what I see in science has led me to believe that there is a designer. Now, I want to pull out I want to read you part of There's something else I want to discuss in this video. Commonly, intelligent design and creation science advocates are accused of making an argument from ignorance. Now, I have this book right here. It's an Introductory Logic by William J. I'm not going to try to pronounce the gentleman's last name because I don't want to pronounce it wrong and be disrespectful. This is a text that was given to me by a man who had studied philosophy and theology and things like that. And it's interesting that going for a science degree, you're not required to study logic, but going for a theology degree, you are. This is something that I was thinking about today, and it actually kind of disturbs me. But I wanted to just read very briefly the description of the appeal to ignorance, argumentum ad ignorantiam. And it says, the fallacy of appeal to ignorance uses the false assumption that if one cannot show the claim of an argument is false, then one can accept the claim as true. It has the form, P is true because you are unable to convincingly show that P is false. Consider the following example. Since you cannot disprove that there are flying saucers, you should accept as reliable the reports of those claiming to have seen such objects. And it goes on, a fault with arguments using appeals to ignorance is the same kind of argument can be used to establish opposing views. Consider or apply to one of the above arguments. Since you cannot prove that there are flying saucers, you should agree that there are no objects of this kind. Furthermore, cases in which a party has not established a given conclusion do not provide evidence that the opposing view is worthy of acceptance. What we have is only an unjustified claim. And then it goes on and talks about legal proceedings in the United States. And anyway, on logic again, I was watching a video by Paul Washer, and he said that it's kind of interesting because he had a friend send him a book on logic, and he's reading the first chapter, and he's reading it and reading it and reading it, And he's like, this is the heaviest logic he has ever read in his entire life. And he studied logic in college at the universities, and he's done his fair share of studying logic. And so he goes and puts the book down, goes out in the kitchen and makes himself a sandwich, and comes back, looks at the cover, and he says he sees that this is actually the logic primer. He sees a schoolmaster standing over a bunch of school children, and he's like, this is interesting. So he reads the preface and finds this is the logic primer for grade school children in the colonial period. So this was a logic book designed for 9-year-olds in the colonial period. And I find that very interesting because I'm going for a bachelor's in biotechnology, and I'm not required to take a class in logic. Now, this is a man who has studied logic as part of being in political science. He's gone to school for political science, he's gone for theology, and he's studied logic. And even though he has studied logic, what grade schools are learning in colonial period is apparently harder than what he had to learn. And Mr. Washer, I wanted to point out also, he had an interesting debate with someone on an issue of genetics. He said people looked at him after he had a debate at one of the talks, and they said, wow, you must have really studied genetics. And the guy went away mad. And Mr. Washer said, it's like, I know nothing about genetics, but I understand logic. Because he understood logic, he was able to ask the guy questions, and they completely refuted his argument. Alright, now I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and like I said, with the story of the solar system with Isaac Newton, I'm not 100% on the details. This is something I have read only secondhand. That's why I am putting together the disclaimer here. However, I will be posting a link to a more detailed source on this particular piece of history. That way you guys can look up the original sources and find out, is what I have said true, or is it not true, or was I totally mistaken about this story? I'm not intentionally lying, but we can find out for sure if the story is true. This is Greg, out.